Hi, so I just wanted to take a quick look at retail on planet Earth, and I came up with this idea that so if the total, at least according to the World Bank, the total GDP on Earth is somewhere around $85 trillion, between 80 and 90 trillion. What would be the all the retail on Earth? And a quick estimate I came up with was something around $20 trillion, and that's basically everything that's sold every single year. So if you look at the whole scale here, this is the 20 trillion, and then you kind of look at all these other companies, mainly the larger retailers like Walmart and Costco. You see that Walmart accounts for about 2.5% of all the retail on Earth. However, the second largest company on Earth would be Costco, and that is about a half a percent of all the sales. And that's significant and significant enough to take a careful look at for one company doing that much business. So here's a quick bar graph kind of showing you the relative numbers for these top retailers on Earth. A lot of them are American, and basically that's kind of a big deal. And it's important to realize that Walmart is quite a bit larger than Costco, with about 500, I guess that would be $1 billion of sales per year. And Costco is somewhere around 100 billion. And you can also see Kroger and Amazon, and I think I'm not sure exactly, what how accurate some of these numbers are, but you can kind of see what the total sales are. So a lot of these are kind of in the same ballpark, but if you look at everyone, you kind of get to see the real picture. So here's a quick little graph I made up showing everybody. It doesn't really even list all their names. Some of them are missing, but you can kind of see what happens with all these retailers. A lot of them, are kind of tapering off around 10 to 50 billion dollars per year. Some of these larger ones. And you might wonder, how they're going to survive and this and that, but they are just ginormous. So maybe that's part of the key here. But basically, this gives you an idea of the graph, relatively speaking, for these top. You might say about 20% of the retail. I'm sorry about that. So it's actually 10%. So the percentage of these top 100 companies is basically about 10% of all the retail on Earth. Looking at this graph here. So if you're super curious and you want to know the exact numbers, here they are from Wikipedia. They actually list a lot of them here, and sources and different locations, the countries, and so and so. I'm particularly interested in Costco and foods and what's going on with food. You'd see that the top of the top, two or three there, you got Costco and Kroger. And then also a lot of other food companies kind of mixed in, as well as hardware and pharmacy and things like that. But basically, of these retailers that are at least selling a lot every year, there is quite a number of them that are involved in food. So this graph kind of shows the relative value. It's a little bit tricky, so don't think of it in terms of dollars. Think of it in terms of relative value. So remember, this is only 10% or even less, actually, of everything, because this is just about 10 or 15 or so of these companies. So you can see Walmart and Costco. You can see Costco is maybe a third of the size of Walmart, and then you see Kroger, Amazon, and the rest of these guys here. And actually, they're these guys are pretty heavily involved with food, and so on, so on. So it's really important. Food is extremely important to retail. So before we get into all the details here, you can see kind of a breakdown, right? So yeah, Costco is fairly large. They have a lot of locations. They actually have some international locations, which I thought were interesting. A particular interest, you'd see they have about 40 locations in Mexico, which is about, say, 10% of their United States locations. So quite a number of, for every 10 Costco's they have in America, maybe one in Mexico. And there's a few of them in the United Kingdom. It's good to have choices, many different stores. There is there's a big grocery store chain that I've been kind of following called COSTCO. Pretty interesting, similar kind of straightforward philosophy as Costco. It might be nice to have some unique and very custom approach to food as well. And you notice that Costco is in Japan and also in South Korea, which is pretty close to Japan, and Taiwan. You might say, okay, that's interesting. Taiwan, pretty small island. But South Korea is also pretty small, but they have quite a number of stores there. Australia, Spain, one store even in Iceland. That would be very interesting, I imagine, to walk into a Costco in Iceland, and a store in France, and a store in Shanghai. So China has American stores there. Anyway, so kind of a breakdown of what's going on in terms of their warehouses. I'm not a big fan of just mass food warehouses, but certainly I'm looking at this whole thing in terms of like, hey, how can we possibly help Costco and help the food situation? Because these guys are big in food. And actually, Walmart, you might remember there used to be a Sam's Club. Walmart is the biggest retailer in the world, as you saw the data before. Significant little slice of that global economy in terms of retail. And they actually had a food store, and a lot of people just go into Walmart now and buy food as well. But I'm not too happy with that. It's getting a little bit, kind of just walk in, buy food, and maybe there needs to be some changes here. But still, these guys are big, and a lot of people buy from them still. So we need to look at this carefully. So this whole idea is kind of a little bit, in my opinion, kind of suspicious, right? They basically opened up this thing called Price Club in San Diego, and that was in around 1976. And basically, you have to, if you think about what goes on today, you have to pay for a membership, and once you have a membership, you can walk into the store. So it's kind of like only certain people can buy their food. Which, in some ways, food should be kind of a special thing, and it should be almost it kind of does have a little bit of sustainability to it if you think about it, because you have to be a member, and it's like those guys need to be sustainable within their membership, right? So it's an interesting thing, and basically they bought an airplane hangar, which is kind of a strange thing to buy, but from a spiritual standpoint, a lot of airplanes probably flew in and out of there at one point, and then now it was food. So basically that Costco in San Diego still exists apparently, and there was a kind of a Hollywood guy that they bought the hangar from there. He was using it for their airplane, and then converted it into a grocery store. So that was the start. And then they moved up to Seattle around 1983. And then Seattle is a pretty nice place to start a business. But Costco is a very straightforward kind of business. They could have chose other places, but they went to Seattle, and then they opened up a space in Portland, and then they opened up another place just in the same year, 1983, out in Spokane, which is all Washington area and Pacific Northwest. So. But you can kind of see the map here, get an idea for where Costco is approximately today. This map's a little bit old, but at least it gives you an idea for what's going on. So let's just review the facts here. So apparently Costco is one of the second largest retailers in the world, and Walmart is basically one of the biggest employers in the world. So what about Costco? That's kind of the deal here. So let's just take a quick look at their revenue here and also employees, so you can kind of see over the years what's been going on. Basically they broke this $100,000 mark, but really it was kind of, that by this time they already had 100,000 employees, and you can see from basically the employment, it just keeps going up and up, and then their net income here also is going up a lot too. So basically, they have about 3 times the revenue and 3 times the income, and so on. So just get you a basic idea here. Okay, so to start off here, we're going to look at Costco over the years, going back to about 1985, which is quite a long time. When you think about it, that's like 40 years. And I did a log graph. I just love log graphs. I hope you hate log graphs, but just kidding. I hope you love them. They're awesome. It just doesn't tell you anything when you do a regular graph over long periods of time. You just don't see where the real change was. So here you can see the real change. Let me just show you the other version. And it's kind of, you can see that first focus on that 1985, 1986 era. And you can see all the way there to about 2000, there's a big jump. So next we're going to look at the other graph, and you can see it's just hard to see these changes. Yeah, so you can see here, it's just kind of funny, right? You don't even notice the 1986 to 2000. You're like, oh yeah, I guess things changed there, but you don't realize that. You can kind of see in the price volume trend below that there was a big change. That means that the price times the amount of shares that are traded was significant. So it does show up there, but on a log graph, we just can see some details that are harder to see in the long term. So we're going to stay with that. That we can kind of focus on. You can see that what we were talking about here was basically around 1995, right? So that jump we just didn't see with the log graph. It was just hard to see. So it makes it look like recent changes are more significant than they actually were. So on the right here is the volume profile, which is basically the amount of shares and the volume. So, and then here is the what I really like is the price volume trend. It's similar to the accumulation and graph that you might want to do. And then on the bottom here, I wanted to do a volume graph just because sometimes I like to think only about the volume in terms of how people were thinking, like, wow, a lot of interest in Costco in this area, and then just a wild change in Costco's interest in here. So, and that kind of tells you how people were thinking about it, right? So a lot of people were thinking about Costco in this time frame. But going back to this graph, we can just set a couple points here. So certainly this is one of the historic markers. We want to draw just a vertical line if we can, and let's draw some verticals here. And we'll just add some yellow verticals, maybe a little bit darker. And so basically right in there was kind of a low point. So that was around December. And then these other future points, you can kind of see this was a pretty major point around 2009 for Costco, and we'd have to look at details in terms of what was going on. Sometimes you can look up on Wikipedia and just search. Sometimes due to the global economy. In this respect, you can see that back here. When the crash happened in 2000 and started in 2007, but in 2008, that was basically the global financial crisis. Didn't affect it too much, but you can see back in 2000, the 2001 crash was maybe more significant on food in general than the two. But this was more sudden and just like everyone was serious and focused on a problem. So, but this was more rocky, right? So we don't, it's hard to say. And even here, this. A 1991 problem for Costco was important. So basically, the price is pretty high right now. It's up at about 300, and you can see there's not a lot of volume relative to back in here. Most of the volume historically has been around $40 a share, and it's interesting that the price is so high, which it can be a good thing, can be a bad thing. It keeps realistic. People involved in buying and selling the stock, but at the same time, it's you can see here that in general people have been buying and buying and buying Costco since this point here, right? So there was really, it was a big up. This was the biggest change in Costco's history. So that started around here. You can see that was the 1994 point, right? And then all throughout, probably not a lot of people realize this, but this was, I almost feel like a lot of people gave up on food after 2008 or 2009 and just said, okay, fine, I'm going to buy from Costco. But this really reflects that period where people were probably thinking about different ideas as opposed to just going to Costco, and at the same time Costco was maybe doing some expansions and things. But the graph from the number of stores and number of employees looks like it was pretty consistently just kept going up. Certainly the stock didn't just keep going up, but their revenues just kept going up. So, but in terms of the price of the stock, so you can see here that going from $8 a share to $40 a share, that's 5 times or so change. 40 to this is not quite, so but so you basically have the overall picture of Costco here. I did make one more one here. This is also a log graph. Kind of see some of my comments. Basically, if you look carefully at this earlier part of Costco, the price actually went down, right, a little bit. So that's kind of important to know about, right? The price was high and then went down and dropped. So basically, when Costco first got started, a lot of people were questioning it, and I think that's maybe a good thing. Like, just there's a lot of grocery stores, and it doesn't always have to be bought from a huge grocery store, but. So you can see, but then in 1987, that was really popular, so things just took off at that point. And you know that from the Costco around 1983 or so, they were starting to build more outside of just Seattle area and San Diego. So this was kind of a huge era. So you can see that in the 1990s here, you have a drop from Costco again, right? So that would be interesting to see, like, what happened, why, and stuff. What's the real reason for that? So, and then a major upswing, and then kind of some turbulence. So this would probably be, if we were really going to get technical and study the mathematics of the stock and things, this area would be very interesting to look at. It's hard because it's still, that's 10 years ago. But this is a real question for what's going on with the modern grocery store industry. Basically, 2000, early 2000 up to about 2009, there was a lot of maybe some small guys needed some help, and they just couldn't get the help back then. So, and now we kind of have a major upswing for the stock. So the last part of this that I wanted to look at is the price to sales ratio. So essentially, that's the price to stock divided by the sales. So if the sales is really high, price divided by sales, right? So the price of the stock, let's say $300 in the case of Costco, and if the sales is, like, say $350, then the value would be less. So it's 300 divided by 350. Well, then it would be less than 1. So that means that the sales is greater than the price per stock. So the price to sales ratio. So you can see here that it was in general back in 2000, middle 2000, up until about 2019. All of a sudden, the price to sales ratio went up. That's not good. That means that the company, the price of the stock is high, and the sales is still about the same. So, you can see that there was that fluctuation started around August of 2018, and then it improved, and then by February, all of a sudden, the market just totally changed its mind and said, okay, we're okay with about 0.85. So you can basically take that number and divide it to get the exact sales per share. So, but basically that's that. So market capitalization is just the total outstanding shares times the value of the stock, right? So 300 and so on. So you can see that the value that people are saying is about $150 billion, 140, right? And that's quite high, right? So it's fairly, and that value is less than the sales actually, right? So because we know that from the price to sales ratio. So price to earnings, so this is kind of a way to compare across different stocks. You can see that 30 or so, 32 was fairly, and then it went up. So that's actually not good. You want the price of the stock. The price of the stock should be low relative to the earnings, and it's a little different. Earnings and sales is different. You want to see that the profit. It's more of a reflection of the profit. So just because the sales is high, it doesn't necessarily mean the profit is good. So a lot of people look at price to earnings more than they look at price to sales. But if you're kind of saying all businesses are the same, then you can kind of look at price to sales. But price to earnings kind of gives you a better idea sometimes because it's just the profit. Different businesses have different profitability. And you can see there's kind of two fluctuations here, one around 35, and then even another one lower here around 29. And if you look at the history of the S&P 500, man, this is extremely high, right? So there's like 15. It used to be a high PE ratio, and now it's like way up here. So that spells a lot of trouble, and yet the sales. So it really means that from a food standpoint, if you think about it, man, they just need to start selling food for higher prices, and that may be what will happen. It's actually a good thing for farmers to sell food at a higher price. It's just this concept of lower and lower prices for food sometimes means lower and lower quality. People can get cancer, get sick. It's not good. So basically, we would expect that the earnings would go up, and the price would still stay high or stable, and maybe even go up faster. The earnings would go up faster than the stock price, right? And maybe that's what people are thinking. People that invest in companies like this, they would say, hey, food is extremely important, which it is. So anyway, give you an idea. But hope this... Okay, well, that's about it for retail and Costco. There's a lot of details here overall, I would say, and any part of this can be studied. I wanted to start the whole discussion with just an overview of the entire retail economy. I hope that was the most helpful, but it's also interesting to see the details about Costco because they are a significant part of food on Earth. Hope you had fun. Let me know what you think. See you later.